again, what I'd like to do first is, Diane, is ask you to go ahead and make your opening remarks, and then Marie, and then we'll get to some questions.
Thank you. Good morning. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak today. This is perhaps the most exciting, most energized time ever in our industry. There's so much need for what we do, so many opportunities, and so many important projects. You're probably familiar with a study commissioned last year by the ANGA Foundation. It identified the need for $313 billion, that is $313 billion with a B, worth of new natural gas pipelines, compressor stations, storage, and processing facilities in our country over the next 20 years. We know this investment is necessary because there is no other source that can meet the nation's needs for clean energy in sufficient volume while also addressing safety, timeliness, reliability, affordability, and reducing carbon emissions. Other forms of energy have their place, no doubt, but natural gas is becoming, maybe already is, the backbone of America's energy economy, and it is clean. As former White House advisor John Podesta told reporters last year when speaking on the importance of natural gas, if you oppose all fossil fuels and you want to turn that switch off tomorrow, that is a completely impractical way of moving forward toward a clean energy future. I look forward to addressing the questions posed to the panel today, but in my opening remarks, I want to focus on the changing dynamics of projects at the federal, state, and local levels. While this may be the most exciting time in our industry, it also may be the most challenging. Some of the challenges are good, the kind that make us better. How do we further minimize the impact of our projects on people, the environment, and historical and cultural resources? How do we make our new and existing projects even safer? These are challenges that I am glad to have. There's another challenge that has risen in importance. It is the increase in high-intensity opposition to essential infrastructure projects. It is not that the idea of opposition is new. It is not. In fact, it's rather expected in our open and transparent federal permitting process. And it is not limited to the natural gas industry. Virtually every major infrastructure project encounters it, from electric transmission lines to roads to housing developments. In Dominion's case, we recently had opposition to a solar farm from an environmental group that had called on us to build solar. Nor would I call opposition broad-based. It is not. Survey after survey shows the vast majority of Americans support these energy infrastructure projects. But the opposition is intense. It is becoming louder, better funded, and more sophisticated. In many cases, the opposition is rooted in admirable passion, but wishful thinking and unrealistic expectations. Unfortunately, some of the strongest resistance seems to be rooted in the willful denial of facts, and worst of all, their strategies are not bound by truth. The most radical of these, but not the majority, believe that shouting loudly and angrily is somehow the way to get things done. We have witnessed intimidation tactics recently in, for example, forcing the FERC to reschedule its May meeting to today because of public security concerns. Their objective is to overrun a well-tested, open, transparent, and effective regulatory model where opposing views have an appropriate role and a strong voice in an attempt to bring all development to a dead stop. As a nation, we cannot afford to let that happen. The FERC had a message for these groups in its recent order rejecting an appeal of its approval for our Cove Point LNG export project. The Commission said, "A controversy does not exist merely because individuals or groups vigorously oppose or have raised questions about an action." If this challenge is not addressed by us, it endangers the reliability and affordability of energy in our country. It puts at risk America's resurgence in manufacturing jobs and the growth of the rest of the economy. This challenge can have real and serious national security implications. I believe that many of the government policies we need are already in place. The Natural Gas Act of 1938, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, other federal regulations and strong state and local regulations have created a framework resulting in the best natural gas system in the world. This regulatory framework provides for significant public involvement, a thorough and transparent examination of all relevant issues, and a timely decision-making process. While what is in place is good, we applaud both the House and Senate for plans presented last week to improve the pipeline siting process and to look for constructive ways for the many regulating agencies to review projects within a reasonable time frame. But we need more than good laws and regulations if important infrastructure projects are to get built. I am here not to just represent Dominion, but to give a voice to an industry. We in the natural gas industry need to speak clearly, speak effectively, and when necessary, speak loudly. We need to make all stakeholders aware of how critical it is to our society that we move forward with growing and improving our natural gas infrastructure. Truth is on our side. We are serving a critical public need. We do it safely. We take great care of the environment and for our neighbors. And we are transparent. We need to aggressively communicate the facts and counter the misinformation. We need to reach out to landowners and their neighbors, elected officials and their staff members, consumers, business owners, organized labor, regulators, environmental organizations, trade associations of all kinds, the news media, and everyone else. And we need to call them to action. We need them to stand up and tell others that America's future depends on getting these projects done. In this case, silence is not golden. Silence is a threat to progress. We must ensure an environment where regulators and elected officials can continue to do their jobs. This requires focus on the part of any project that is just as important as route selection, engineering, and construction. That's communicating with and reaching out to the many stakeholders. I believe we have some good examples to talk about in our success with Cove Point and in these early days of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. In the case of Cove Point, the two most valuable lessons I can pass on are first, communicate early and often, and second, get help from your friends. For Cove Point, we put together what was at the time the largest stakeholder outreach effort in our 100-year history. We mailed 25,000 fact books, made 15,000 phone calls to residents and businesses around the plant, hosted supporter events of up to 1,000 people, and conducted an extensive social media and web campaign. We advertised so often and in so many places that project opponents became annoyed that they could not escape it. And I cannot thank enough nor overvalue the importance of the support we received from the community, our industry, and organized labor. Earlier this morning, you heard from Sean McGarvey of North America's Building Trade Unions. Sean's organization rallied the support of its members time and time again. Hundreds of union members attended the public meetings, many of them speaking passionately in favor of the project. They wrote letters and emails. They met with elected officials. It was an amazing effort. And now, thanks to these focused outreach efforts, nearly 1,000 workers are on site constructing this facility today. On the industry side, I want to call out Marty, Durbin, and ANGA. Marty and ANGA did its members great service by supporting a project that can help its members reach new markets. Thank you, Marty. The same goes for the American Petroleum Institute, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the Chambers Energy Institute. They made it clear that while regulators and elected officials may be hearing from project opponents, they did not represent the majority. They heard loud and clear that there were many, many thousands of people who stood behind the project. For the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, ACP as we call it, we are following a similar strategy but even bigger. Our partners in the project, Duke Energy, Piedmont Natural Gas, and AGL Resources are standing side by side with us. We are gathering support such as the 20,000 favorable comments submitted to FERC by the Consumer Energy Alliance from people in North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. These are the states where the project will be built. The advice I offer from the ACP are these. First, be sensitive to the legitimate concerns of all stakeholders and address them. Second, make clear the public necessity of the project. In terms of legitimate concerns, Imagine collecting the mail one day and finding a letter saying a company wants to build a natural gas pipeline on your property. You're not likely to be happy. You will wonder about the disruption of the construction, whether it will negatively impact your property value, and whether you should be worried about safety. All fair questions, and there are good, honest answers. With a 550-mile route, it's hard to be everywhere to address all questions and concerns expeditiously, but it is critical. We need to remember what we are asking of people. We need to be ready to answer the big picture question from day one, what about me? As for making clear the need, there seems to be a disconnect with some people between a natural gas pipeline project and the utility function it serves. In the case of ACP, more than 90% of the capacity has been subscribed by electric and gas utilities. Gas flowing through the pipeline will be used to generate electricity to help clean the air by replacing old, inefficient coal-fired generation. The gas will heat homes and run businesses. It will enhance energy reliability and security. You cannot get any more public utility than that. But opponents focus on NIMBY issues. They miss or ignore that function completely. That is not to say other benefits are not important. In the case of ACP, we expect energy consumers in Virginia and North Carolina will save about $377 million each year in lower energy costs. Construction will bring more than $2.7 billion in economic activity in the 3 pipeline states, and there will be $25 million a year in local tax revenue. But those benefits are secondary to the idea that this is a project that must receive a certificate of public convenience and necessity because it is being built for the convenience and necessity of the public, the millions of customers served by the partners. Today, communications and stakeholder outreach is a strategic skill and is as important as engineering and construction. It is an absolutely necessary skill. Nothing will get built without it. What we have done has worked for a long time. Regulations can be strengthened to support the infrastructure growth critical to America's future. Again, facts are on our side. It is up to us to keep improving our communication skills to ensure that all stakeholders have these facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Marie?
Yeah, I want to thank Sean for starting to set the stage because it really is about the customers in the Northeast. National Grid operates in the Northeast. We have about 4 million gas customers up there, and our gas infrastructure needs support. We need to get new additional supply up into that area. So when you look at how the energy industry is changing, you look at ISO New England, and we've gone from 15% generation gas-fired to almost 50%. You see that jump, you have this huge demand. And our gas generators up in the Northeast aren't firm customers. So when you think about the generation not being firm and our customers having the firm gas planned, and as we're bringing the gas up into the Northeast, the place that feels it is the electric side. So when you look at the costs and the price spikes, and I have a lot of data if anybody's interested in the specifics of the costs, but one piece that I think really stands out, in 2012, the Northeast market spent $5 billion on energy. During the polar vortex, in 3 months, our customers spent $5 billion on electricity. So you think about how that drove in those winter months. We hear a lot of conversation about other options other than having a gas pipeline. Diane and I were talking before. It's the safe way to bring it up. It really is. It's the right way to bring the gas to the Northeast. You hear a lot of conversations. We talked earlier this morning about LNG. And really our LNG assets, we have 12 LNG tanks, and they're for peak support. You know, they really are just part of our fleet up in the Northeast to supply our customers and help shave costs in New York. We can actually liquefy there. But the other tanks in New England we're trucking to, and those are just to help the distribution local constraints. We have 2 pipelines that we're supporting, wanting to come up to the Northeast. Kinder Morgan has one where our gas companies have prescribed for some of the gas into that region, and hopefully it'll come right up into Massachusetts. And the Spectra line that we have, we actually are contracting it with our electric LDCs, because the constraint that we have in the Northeast in the electric market is creating a huge risk. And Sean talked about that as well, and I appreciate that, because it really does talk about how that blended nature of the two really, it's important to have the gas support. So our LDC customers are stepping up to see if we can in fact get that firm gas for the electric generators for our customers to, you know, help balance those costs. In 2013, Sean was exactly right. We had the highest gas cost in the nation in the Northeast. And Marcellus is not very far away. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. So think from our customer perspective. I'm grateful that I'm here today to be able to help talk about what the constraints are from a gas operator's perspective, where I'm there on those cold winter days, I'm trying to balance it. And you know, you lose a compressor at one of the stations, and from one of our pipeline folks with our contracts, you get a force majeure. Believe me, I'm not sleeping that night, because when I think about, you know, the loads, the places like Brooklyn, New York, if we lose the supply into a place like that, can you imagine what it would take to relight? To relight a big section of Brooklyn, those old buildings? I mean, that's something that will keep me awake at night until we have enough gas supply up in the area that we can really rely upon it.
Great. Well, thank you both. And let me start by asking, and Diane, you really went into a lot of detail on what needs to be done to reach out to communities and the legitimate concerns that landowners have and that folks have. And as a former president of the Homeowners Association, just try to get sidewalks or speed bumps. You know, it gets it's personally relevant when these things happen. But at the same time, these aren't new issues. I mean, these are the types of things that companies have had to deal with through pipeline and other infrastructure development for a long time. I think we've clearly seen a change in the debate. I sometimes hesitate to put it this way, but call it the Keystoneization of every pipeline project that's out there. You know, if we can stop one permit, we can stop, you know, the development of fossil fuels. That obviously has, I mean, one of the reasons we're here. That's changing the way we're all looking at how we have to manage these projects. So actually, for both of you, I'd like, to kind of talk a little bit more about how your companies have now had to do things in a different way. Again, you went into some of the detail already, but I'd love to hear more, especially with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline Project so front and center right now.
Right, and you know, we never really thought about, we did stakeholder outreach, but when you went and did the open houses and you communicated with everybody in the area as just part of the FERC process, there was stakeholder outreach involved with that. You would try to make sure you were addressing all of the concerns in the open process. It has probably gone up by orders of magnitude right now, and because the opposition is really targeting the permitting process all throughout, looking at all of the different federal agencies, using social media to really make it seem like it's larger than it is. There could be, 12 people coming to the open house or 50 people coming to the open house that's representing a lot of the opposition. But as the social media networks increase, it's getting a lot of airtime. And so really we need to speak up and get a lot of airtime to show how many supporters are out there. And that's taken a much larger effort than what we used to do. So we've really had to concentrate on making sure that the supporters are willing to speak up. When you're passionate about something, it's easy to speak up. When you're supportive of something, a lot of times you don't think to. So really going out to the supporters, will you write these letters? Will you come to the open houses and come and speak in the importance of the need, the critical need for the project, so that the legislators that are supportive of it and the regulators that have the information have all of the information around it. And so a lot of the effort has been trying to get the supporters that are way, way more than the opposition to actually come out and speak and try to bring that education everywhere, where before I don't think we had to do that. Now getting the fact books out, We didn't have fact books before. People that were interested came to the open houses. Now we really create, both for Cove Point and for Atlantic Coast Pipeline, an information set of facts, because truth is on our side here on the need and the safety, the reliability, the environmental protection around all of the projects that matter, and try to distribute it as widely as we can.
Marie?
I really like the fact book discussion, because I always feel like when you can have the fact-based discussions. So, you know, being an ops person for a long time, sitting up in front of groups talking about pipelines is something I never thought I'd be doing, but I think you have to be there from the fact-based discussion. I have to show up. No longer is it my GovRels team, their responsibility to go out and have the discussion. I need to be there with the facts. I'm the one who's trying to operate this system that's constrained. I have the 5,000 employees out there during the winter trying to make sure we don't have a hiccup. So bringing the facts to light, coming forward, talking about the benefit for the customer, doing it from the customer's perspective, because they're the ones, as Sean shared, his daughters, they're the ones who are paying the price for the lack of infrastructure. It's not just a conversation that is held by a GovRel team, a few open houses. We're having to do it differently. We're bringing the facts forward. We're looking for opportunities like you've offered here today, Marty, to talk about the situation and try and have people understand the magnitude of what it is when you don't have the infrastructure.
Right. No, and what I clearly haven't heard, and certainly the experience hasn't been there, is that no one's saying you don't want to address concerns that are raised. You've done that in the past, and I think the experience shows, and what you're saying here too is, I mean, there are legitimate issues that are being raised, and you're willing to get right to them. But so now raise that to kind of the next level here, to be able to get past the, okay, it's coming through my property, or in which again, legitimate concern. And then there are those who just want to stop any infrastructure project. But Marie, thinking about New England itself, if you were talking about just the broader, but what is the increased use of natural gas in New England meant, both environmentally and economically?
Well, it's actually a good news story. When you look at the increased production out of the gas-fired generation, you look at what we've benefited from: sulfur dioxide, reduced carbon in huge numbers. And so when you see the environment becoming much cleaner because of the use of natural gas, it's the right story for the customers. So when you think about the holistic picture of the growth of gas and the desire for the customers to get off their oil in Northeast, I grew up in California. I was at PG&E for 26 years. I remember looking for homes in New England, and it was amazing to me how many houses were still on oil with a pipeline out front. And to me, it's such a cost-effective option now. The challenge we have is the volume of people who want to get off the oil. Think about all those just beyond the big generation. Think of all the homes and businesses as they move to a cleaner fuel. I mean, it's exponential how we're helping the environment with the natural gas, and it's at a price point that makes sense to bring it north.
And Diane, every utility, every energy company out there is I mean, this isn't about, and certainly not our ANGA's vision isn't, let's move everything to natural gas. We understand we need to have a diverse fuel supply, and that there are policy reasons why you're trying to have a diverse fuel mix and all that. But for Dominion itself and the large footprint you have, how have you seen natural gas now fitting into your overall portfolio and again, kind of across the board?
Right. So for Dominion, diversity of supply has always been extremely important. So we have nuclear, we have coal, we have natural gas, and renewables. We have solar and wind as well, and hydro. So it's always been very important for reliability and for cost to have a balanced portfolio. And with the shifts in a lot of the environmental rules, we have had to shut numerous of our coal facilities down, and we would expect with the latest regulations from the EPA to have to continue that path. So there's clearly an increased reliance on natural gas. We are building, we've announced 400 megawatts of build for solar in Virginia. That's a lot, but that's not a lot for the total portfolio that we need, and it's going to take a long time. So a lot of our build in recent years has been in natural gas, very large combined cycles. And as we move to that, the increase in diversity goes along with increase in reliability. So as you're becoming more dependent on a fuel, you need more infrastructure. You can't rely on just a single pipeline in a region. So that's really with Atlantic Coast Pipeline, having diversity of supply, diversity of infrastructure, diversity of fuel is just critical. So with an increasing awareness that natural gas must play a very large part of the next decades, increased reliability equals increased infrastructure.
Okay, great. And Marie, kind of picking up on that, I mean, what do you see is that how does the expansion of natural gas support renewable energy in your portfolio?
That's a great question. In California, I really saw how the gas-fired turbines make a difference in supporting it, because we really don't have renewables at a scale. The blizzard Juno that hit the Northeast was a perfect example. As much as we've done in Massachusetts on wind and solar, after the snow fell and there was no wind, we had nothing coming out of our renewable portfolio. So having the gas-fired generation that can quickly ramp up is a good blend and an important part of that mix.
Great. Why don't we, okay, we'll go ahead and move to questions from the audience now.
Good morning. Bill Holland with SNL Energy. The CEO of the New York ISO, Stephen Whitley, at CERAWeek a couple weeks ago was very uncomfortable with the increasing reliance on natural gas for his system because of some geographical problems and some fuel diversity problems. I suspect this isn't news to you, Marie, but can you tell me, what do you do to change his mind?
Actually, part of changing his mind is a big piece of the Spectra line. When we've had conversations with the ISO, it's not about the reliance only on the gas-fired generation, because as I said, that's 50% of our fuel mix. It's about reliance on that gas generation with a firm contract. So we're in an interesting place. The ISO New England can't go get that firm contract. So how are we going to do it differently? So we're trying to think outside the box. We have the Massachusetts Electric Company. We have the Narragansett Electric Company that's part of GRID, the two electric operating companies. Can we make a difference by getting the firm gas for the generation? So the question isn't the diversity of what we have, it's the ability to have firm gas for those gas-fired generation. So yes, after the polar vortex, we did meet, and at that time I was actually in a role where I was over the asset management for both the gas and electric. And so I was on the transmission side, and it was a great conversation we had that day on how are we going to get firm gas for our gas-fired generation. So it wasn't the reliance on the generators, it was the reliance on the fuel that we can commit to those generation units. Does that answer your question?
Not really, because he's still worried about it.
Yeah, because we haven't got Spectra's line up yet. So I think Access Northeast is an important piece of it.
He didn't seem to make any exceptions.
Oh, okay.
He was pretty cut and dry, but he was not comfortable with the increasing reliance on natural gas in the system. And because of diversity problems, and because apparently his gas power plants aren't located where it's demanded.
Yeah, the greater Boston has a specific issue too. We did have Dominion's plant up there in Salem that has since, it's going to be, Footprint is trying to repower that as a gas gen as well. But right now there are constraints in certain areas of the Massachusetts.
I have a question up front here. Microphone's coming around.
Hi, Bill Lovelace from USA Today. I guess questions more for Diane. I'm interested in Have you seen the level of intensity, the intensity of the opposition increase even since Cove Point when it comes to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline? And you know, despite the company's recognition that it needs to communicate well, do you really think you're communicating well enough yet when it comes to that pipeline project?
Okay. No, I think probably similar to Cove Point. I wouldn't say that there's been a significant increase in the amount of opposition for Atlantic Coast versus Cove Point. I'll never say good enough. We can always do better, and we need to just keep at it. What I will say with Atlantic Coast is starting earlier. With Cove Point, it really was well into the permitting process and the FERC application process before I think the opposition kind of rallied and started being as vocal as they were. Atlantic Coast started pretty much from the time of announcement, many moving just from one to the next. When they're really against all infrastructure kind of going across the board for this project.
You know, and Marty brought up the Keystone issue. I mean, do you think that the Keystone issue, in fact, has become an influence factor in some way for projects like yours?
I don't look at it as a Keystone issue. I know I've heard that analogy in the past. I see this, the opposition, a lot of it in its grounding is anti-fossil fuel at its core. And so any chance to try to shut down fossil fuels is that way. The difference here being a lot of the infrastructure here really is that public utility need. It is there to meet the Clean Power Plan. It is there to meet the reliability of the electric and gas infrastructure that exists here today. So very different kinds of dynamics and project bases. And people will try to say, yes, there are those similarities because there's opposition in Keystone. There is opposition in natural gas infrastructure. So that's where I really see the similarities end.
And Bill, if I could clarify my comment on that too, when I was talking about Keystone, it wasn't specific to ACP, but again, what we've seen is, you know, and as Diane said, it's like every infrastructure project out there, the permitting process is now seen as an opportunity for stopping it going forward. Again, legitimate opportunity for public input. It should be there, and it needs to be robust. But I think it pushes some responsibility back on not only the industry itself, but I would say, you know, local officials, you know, customers in the area where these projects are going to be, whether it's a standalone facility or a pipeline project, to, you know, be willing to stand up and say, look, we're going to address the legitimate concerns that our constituents have, but here's why we need to move these projects forward. Now, obviously, we need to get those officials comfortable with the idea that, yes, this is in the public interest. Here are the benefits that, you know, that my region is going to realize, and that's really a big part of why we want to have this conversation today. This is, you know, there are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed, but let's make sure we're having an honest, fact-based, and reasonable discussion on being able to move infrastructure forward in a way that's going to allow us to, you know, again, realize the opportunity we have here.
Do you think the industry is as effective as it needs to be at this point?
Well, I would join Diane in saying never say we're good enough. I think this is an area where it has to evolve. This is where, you know, we've got to be willing to be nimble and to see where is the conversation going and where do we need to be involved in it. Again, it's not always just about, I'm just talking about defeating things or stopping things. It's no, how do we effectively get into the conversation? You know, a part of this is, call it energy literacy, call it you know, general education, a better understanding that we've moved so quickly from a time of energy scarcity or a perception of energy scarcity to one of energy abundance, and now how do we best take advantage of that going forward? It does require a build of infrastructure, and we've got to be able to have that honest conversation.
I'm Susan Ginsburg with the Independent Petroleum Association, and as an association that, you know, supports using all sources of energy, this question isn't meant to say, you know, renewables are bad, but does the increasing reliance on renewables, does it really decrease your need for natural gas infrastructure?
Right now in the Northeast, the volumes that are coming in that are renewable Right now, I just popped up what I have following on that question. 8% is what we have. We have just over 1,000 megawatts of renewables right now, and natural gas is almost 18,000 megawatts. So when you look at the dramatic difference of renewables, yes, we do need to bring more renewables on board, but I don't see it solving the energy issue with the cost of electricity up in the Northeast in any time in the near future. There's a lot of work to do to really bring that level of renewables to market, and I don't think we're going to solve it at a state-by-state level. I think it's how do you unlock some of the renewables from different parts of the U.S. and bring them in a market, bring them into the market, you know, bring the wind out of the Midwest, bring it out to the East Coast. I think that's when you're going to bring a lot more renewables that are going to be sizable in the portfolio. But now the natural growth we're seeing up in the Northeast is not going to really change the portfolio enough that we aren't going to have that reliance on the gas-fired generation. But we still have over 30% of the Northeast is the nuclear. So we still have a blended mix. As you said, it's important. You have to have the mix. But the reliance on 50% of your portfolio that has the potential not to be available in the winter is the challenge we're facing. That 50% that we've put in for the natural gas for the rest of the year has been a great value option. It just happens when the constraints come during the cold winter months.
And I would echo something Marie said before when she talked about when the snow came down and the wind stopped. So you do need infrastructure to have as a backup, which likely is going to be natural gas. But when the wind is blowing and when the sun is out, it does offset, from an energy perspective, the usage of natural gas. So it definitely has its role and will increase over time as part of the balance. It's just going to be quite a long time before it's in sufficient quantities to have a large offset against the natural gas.
Time for one more question. Bill, you want another follow-up? Sure. Got the microphone? Here we go.
Thanks for letting me double dip. This question is for both you ladies, and maybe even you too, Marty. You're talking about public outreach to a public. How do you differentiate these Atlantic Coast pipelines, these large transmission projects, to a public that reads almost daily about a leak or an explosion in the gas system somewhere in the United States, and just naturally is going to associate that leak or explosion with your project?
Having some of the older infrastructure of the U.S. up in the Northeast, we do have a lot of leaks. Bringing the leak maps to light, you know, the Google mapping project. Two of the cities that I serve, Staten Island and Boston, are two where they show the gas leaks on the infrastructure in the system. So I think I get right back to that fact-based book. When you talk about the facts of the safety of the system and some of the recent incidents, they aren't on the transmission system. They are issues on the distribution system, which is another banner I wave as I replaced this year nearing 500 miles in the Northeast of cast iron and other leak-prone pipe. You know, the unprotected steel, the cast iron, we're doing a huge investment there. My portfolio of spend this year on the capital side for the distribution system is $1.3 billion. So you're right, it's hard to explain the difference between a gas leak on a distribution system and, frankly, a gas leak that isn't significant enough to run out and do it that day, to one that, to translate that into Spectra has a billion cubic foot year pipeline coming into the Northeast, and it's a safe project. So you're right, it's a real tough discussion, but it's bringing the facts to the surface, talking about the industry, helping our regulators understand it and really speaking with one voice on, you know, how do you balance the risk of a system?
I would say the natural gas pipeline industry that is regulated by PHMSA, FERC, is one of the safest industries in the world. And the new pipes, the new technology for investigating old pipes, smart pigging, those types of things, have just moved along phenomenally, that it really does get back to the fact-based book of what the safety of this industry has done. And I will say that I believe that the pipeline industry is one of the safest there is.
And Bill, at the risk of speaking for a part of the industry I don't directly represent, I think that that's exactly right. The expanding and replacing existing pipeline infrastructure has the added benefit of improving safety and bringing on these the new safety technologies. So again, it's having that honest conversation with the constituents. All right, well, please join me in thanking our guests for being here this morning.